Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 4.1b, and this is the second part of the origins and rise of the independence movement of Zimbabwe. So we're going to continue our discussion on that. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the impact World War II and the Cold War had on the development of the independence movement in Zimbabwe, explain how the Central African Republic broke apart, and lastly, describe the Universal Declaration of Independence and how the global community responded to that document. So first, let's start talking about the impact of World War II on Zimbabwe's independence movements. So World War II clearly showed the horrors of racism through the Holocaust. I don't think anybody would really negate that statement at all. So the entire global community got to see the horror of genocide and racism, on a magnificent scale. And so that is going to cause the global community to start being more sympathetic to anti-colonial movements, anti-racist movements, and the like. So it also helped to know that Allied leaders like Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, they promised self-determination in the Atlantic Charter. And the Atlantic Charter was a document that was signed by the United States and Great Britain that promised an end to colonialism and imperialism and the kind of thing if the Allies won World War II, and so that's what happened. So they promised self-determination, meaning that countries would be able to determine if they wanted to continue being a colony or if they wanted to be independent. And of course, just like with black soldiers in the United States, black soldiers in Africa that actually fought for their colonial rulers. So they actually fought. If you were in an English colony, you fought for the British. If you were in a French colony, you fought for the French, etc. And so black soldiers actually fought alongside white soldiers in East Africa and in Burma, which is over in Asia. And so after the war, just like black soldiers in the United States, they couldn't go back to being subservient. They were like, look, I just risked my life for your empire, and so I'm not going to go back to being, expecting white people to rule over me when I get back home. And so, unfortunately, this gentleman right here, who is Godfrey Huggins, he is going to be elected prime minister by the white minority in Rhodesia at the time, and he is going to continue the racist policies that were in place before World War II. And so, as a result of that, S rank came back into being prominent in 1945. So, after they took a little hiatus, they are now going to come back into power. And then workers began to go on strike. So black workers really did begin to go on strike as a result of these racist policies. So we're starting to see action happening on that front. So in 1945, when World War II ends, we see the beginnings of the Cold War. And so priorities are going to begin shifting within the British Empire. So right in 1945, the British government is going to have an election, and Churchill is going to lose, believe it or not. Even though he guided them through the World War II, his government is going to lose re-election in 1945, and this gentleman is going to replace him, and he was a member of the Labour Party, and that's how you spell it in England, so to honor them. I think that's it. But anyway, so this gentleman is Clement Attlee is his name. And so he is going to have a new British government. And this government is increasingly concerned over racial tensions in southern Rhodesia. That's what the SR stands for. So they're very concerned about the racial tension that's going on there. However, the Cold War is a much bigger priority. And the reason being is because the Cold War is about aligning Western powers together in a conglomerate group to ward off the perceived threat that the Soviet Union and the communist countries in Eastern Europe opposed to Western domination. And so as a result of that, Britain allowed the racist policies to continue in southern Rhodesia as long as southern Rhodesia continued to support the Western allies during the Cold War. However, Britain also was very concerned about racist policies that will alienate the black community and turn them away from democracy and then possibly cause them to go into communism. So Britain was kind of in a double-edged sword here in that regard. Britain also continued to fear guerrilla warfare, that as the racist policies that are being implemented got harsher and harsher, black people are going to become more and more resentful, and then therefore warfare can break out, or they will turn away from democracy altogether. Another aspect that actually influences the origins and rise of Zimbabwe's independence movement is the actual breakup of the Central African Federation that was created earlier on by the merging of the three colonies of Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland. And so black leaders fear the spread of racist policies from southern Rhodesia to northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland. We've already established that. And so the black community in both northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland were very fearful that those policies would spread over to their particular areas. And so this is going to give rise to two different groups. One is the Nyasaland African Congress, which is going to be led by Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, and this is this gentleman photographed here, and he will eventually become the first president of Malawi. You can see that right there. And then Zambia African National Congress is going to be led by Kenneth Kaunda, and this is this gentleman pictured here, and he will become the first president of Zambia. Now, Britain is fearful of spread of violence during the Cold War, and so they don't want any other violence to be spreading out because we have Cold War things going on. And I kid you not, they did send a commission, I swear. You know, they sent another commission. So Britain is famous for sending commissions. Now, this particular commission, though, did come up with basically the same finding as they did in 1939, and that was that they agreed that the Central African Republic, you know, should disband, you know, because there was such great opposition by the black majority there to having the Federation continue. So in 1964, the British government finally accepted and agreed to break up the Central African Republic. And as a result of that, Britain unanimously granted independence to Northern Rhodesia, which became Zambia. And the reason why was because they were going to allow majority rule. Same thing with Nyasaland. It became Malawi, and it was under majority rule. On the flip side of the very same coin, in Southern Rhodesia, they were continuing minority rule, and Great Britain said, then you will not become independent. It remained a self-governing colony under British observation, but Britain refused to allow Southern Rhodesia to become independent because it was not going to allow majority rule. Another factor that influences Zimbabwe's independence movement is the Universal Declaration of Independence, which was issued in 1965. We'll talk about it a little bit more here. Now, as a result of Great Britain's actions, before they're discussed prior, Southern Rhodesia felt like they were abandoned by Great Britain because they had granted independence to Zambia, they had granted independence to Malawi, but here Southern Rhodesia wasn't going to get independence. So as a result, ultimately, they're going to issue the UDI, or Universal Declaration, or excuse me, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. I need to correct myself there. It is the Unilateral Declaration of Independence in 1965. And so white people returned to a more right-wing party that has grown in Southern Rhodesia, and that is the political party known as the Rhodesian Front. And so this is kind of a very white, it is definitely a white party, but it is very racist and it has extreme policies. And so more and more white minority people are supporting that particular political party. So since 1961, Southern Rhodesia and Great Britain have been in negotiations on independence. So Southern Rhodesia has been pushing for this for quite some time. So this has at least been 4 years that this has been going on. However, in 1964, Ian Smith, who is this gentleman pictured here, he became the Southern Rhodesian Prime Minister, and once he did that, talks actually crumbled because this gentleman took a hard crackdown on black leaders. So when he started basically becoming more militant and violent on black leaders, talks between him and Great Britain broke down because they're not doing this in good faith, and so Britain and Southern Rhodesia just couldn't even talk anymore. So eventually that pushed on November 11th, 1965 for Prime Minister Ian Smith here to issue the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. What that did was that it officially broke most of the ties, and keep that word in mind, most of the ties between Southern Rhodesia and Great Britain, and it effectively made Southern Rhodesia an independent nation. And some people recognize it, but it's not really going to be official in terms of independent until 1970, when they officially declared the Republic of Rhodesia under a minority-led government. And what we mean by this when we say it's official in 1970 and they changed the name is that they close off the other things that are connections that they still have with Great Britain in 1970. Now, immediately after the Republic of Rhodesia is declared, there's going to be a lot of tension between Southern Rhodesia and its neighbors because of its racist policies that its minority government is causing. So the global response to the Unilateral Declaration of Independence was quick and swift. It was condemned by the United Nations. It was condemned by the Organization of African Unity, and it was condemned by the Commonwealth of Nations. I mean, this is a large group of nations that have publicly said that what you have done, Southern Rhodesia, is not acceptable. As a result, Great Britain is going to call for economic sanctions on Southern Rhodesia. This is going to cause more tensions in the region, and the reason why is because that region of Southern Africa, they largely depended on a stable Southern Rhodesia, and so if there's economic sanctions in the area, it's going to cause instability. That's the first thing, and it's going to cause more tension in the region that's already kind of on the brink because of, new nations are getting independent around it, and those nations are struggling to survive because of influence in both West and East. And so this is causing tension in the region, and so adding economic sanctions to that is going to make it even worse. And it didn't help matters because countries like South Africa and in Portugal, Mozambique was a colony of Portugal at the time, but Portugal, the nation, was actually sympathetic to the Southern Rhodesian regime. So Portugal, its colony Mozambique, supported Southern Rhodesia. And so that's a problem. And it gives Southern Rhodesia some leverage since, they have public support from other countries and they have other countries around them that are dependent on a successful and stable Southern Rhodesia. So it does give Southern Rhodesia some leverage to wager that, well, you may not like our policies, but if we collapse and our government collapses, other nations around us are going to feel that effect. So it does give them some leverage. And in 1971, a settlement is going to be agreed to eventually convert Southern Rhodesia into having majority rule. However, this does continue to allow minority rule for the foreseeable future. And I kid you not, in 1972, Great Britain is going to send the Pierce Commission to come down and investigate to see how far they're moving towards eventually returning the country back to majority rule. Of course, that's not going to go well, but they're going to at least try. And there you have it. We have completed the origins and rise of the independence movement of Zimbabwe. And so we are now at the 1970s in our timeline within this lesson. So we, in the last two lessons, 4.1a and now 4.1b, we discussed all of the different impacts through colonization, et cetera, and that has now brought us up to the 1970s in our timeline. So now this lesson has concluded. Can you explain the impact that World War II and Cold War had on the independence movement of Zimbabwe? Can you explain how the Central African Republic broke apart? And then, can you describe the unilateral, that should be unilateral, Declaration of Independence and how the global community responded? If you can, then pat yourself on the back. You did an amazing job. At this point, complete any activity that you have for 4.1b, and then you are able to move on to lesson 4.2a. There may be a proficiency check in here, so check with me before you do that. But if not, move on to 4.2. Thanks so much for your time and have a great day.